So to get our program kicked off tonight, I'd like to introduce my fabulous colleague, Annie Carlano, who is the Senior Curator of Craft, Design, and Fashion.
Thank you, Cynthia, and hello, everyone. Thank you for being here for the second in our series, the CAD series of Contemporary Architecture and Design, which brings together true innovators in the field. And tonight, it is really my pleasure to introduce Kim Mupangilaï. I did it, it's actually Mupangilaï. Who comes to us from New York City, where she's lived only for 9 years. She was born in Antwerp, Belgium, and she is half Belgian and half Congolese. And at university in Louvain, she studied both graphic design and interior architecture, and came to making furniture and sculptural objects in a more familial way, shall we say. She's a super talent, and her work, the reason I love it and the reason she was selected for this series, is that her work really merges these two historical traditions. And in the case of Belgian art, it references, you can see on the screen, this very organic form. It is reminiscent of Belgian Art Nouveau, which is really the most emphatic, and in fact the origin of that movement. And then Congolese art and design is also integrated into these, what she will tell you are these kind of heritage and self-identifying forms, a vocabulary that she has created in the recent past. Her work is in major design collections in the world, including the Vitra Museum, the Cooper Hewitt Museum, the Denver Art Museum. She's had international residencies, most recently in Italy, where she was working on a new body of work. She is on leave this year, right, from Parsons School of Design, where she's a professor. And her work, I have to look at this quote again. Glenn Adamson wrote a couple of years ago that her work has the sculptural prowess of a young Wendell Castle. And with that, I introduce you to Kim. She didn't know about that quote.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Annie. Thank you so much for coming. I'm a little nervous, so bear with me. I'm going to try my best to explain a bit more about my work, how I came about it, and who I am as a designer. As Annie told you all, my name is Kim Mupangilaï. I am born and raised in Belgium. Let me go a little further. And originally I studied interior architecture and graphic design, and am now also teaching at Parsons School of Design. I wrote this quote because when I first came to New York, I kind of felt at home, really. I've never really felt at home in Belgium because, I mean, like we all know, it's very easy to put people in boxes, and being biracial, I was always confused with, like, do I belong on that side? Do I belong on that side? And I felt like, in a way, that Belgium was just too small and too narrow-minded when it came to just biracial children. And so when I moved to New York, I remember having that first feeling of, like, okay, everyone around the corner is my brother or my sister. I don't get these questions of like, oh, what's your ethnicity and where are you from? And so I didn't have to explain myself. And then around the pandemic, I finally had the courage to kind of fulfill a dream I've had since I was 16, which is creating my own furniture. But I always knew that I didn't want to just like flip through magazines or books and be like, oh, I love this designer or this architect. I wanted it to be something that came out of me, that had a personal narrative. So when people would ask about it, I could really explain the story and where it came from, rather than like, oh, I just, made a collage of this designer and that designer, and then I morphed it all together. So here you just see one image of a couple of pieces of my first body of work that I will get into in the next slides. So again, for me, this first body of work was kind of like a cross-cultural self-portrait, because being raised by a Belgian mom and Belgian grandfather, I was taught a lot of like woodworking techniques predominantly used in Europe. And I didn't know that much about my Congolese side, because my father immigrated to Belgium when he was very young. And I've always wanted to like really dig deeper and understand that side as well. Therefore, I called it a cross-cultural self-portrait. Here you have a little bit of an overview of that first body of work that consisted out of 8 pieces. And so when I first started, I obviously looked at a lot of African books, predominantly Central Africa, because Congo is in Central Africa. And my father just like started sending me all these books from Belgium, like, dive deep, and just get yourself familiar with all the artifacts and the history. And that's what I did. And then there was this one specific book that focused on currency tools and Congolese weapons. And I was just so fascinated by it. Here you see a couple of them that I selected out of the book. But I don't know if everyone knows, but currency tools, they had so many meanings. They were used to tell someone's status. They were used to celebrate big life events like birth, marriage, and so on. And they were also used to just like trade land, pre-colonized country. And so when I just abstracted one, I just felt like this looks more like just a form to me rather than like a tool or something that has violence attached to it, or something that is used to conquer. And then next, I kind of went further and further and started sketching these tools, the ones that really like jumped out for me, and just abstracted different parts of these tools. And so in that kind of way, I slowly started kind of cultivating my own personal alphabet of form, and just started to have fun with it. Like, I think, well, this is from 6 or 7 years ago, but in the left top corner, you can already see that I started seeing or sketching a chair in one of these tools, and the second, in a lot of them, but I just started seeing this whole new language that at that time I felt like I discovered to understand my heritage better. And so this particular tool, which is originally a throwing knife, the darker part is the part I was really focused on and abstracted. And later in my presentation, you will see it coming back. But first, I want to talk a little bit about reference and reinterpretation, because again, I didn't want to just extract something that had existed, but more so looking at them, understanding them, and then giving my own reinterpretation to kind of preserve something that already existed in the past. So in a way, like trying to hold both worlds. And so before I started, of course, I looked at different materials, but I wanted to mainly focus on materials that were predominant in the DRC, which is teak, which is one of the woods that are used to build boats, floors, housing, rattan, raffia, and then volcanic rock. And banana fiber paper had a different meaning for me because most of you that are holding a phone or working with a tablet know that Congo is very, very rich in minerals. And so the rock represents kind of like just the wealth that is really in the soil of Congo. And then banana fiber paper is something that I wanted to explore because my father would always talk about my grandmother wrapping all the food in banana leaves and storing it. And I was like, how do I bring that part of the story back into my work? So then I stumbled upon paper made from banana leaves. And then rattan and raffia are very common, not only in Central Africa and Congo, but obviously all of Africa for basket weaving, tapestry, mats, and so on. And here we come to my first piece of furniture. I'll just let you all have a little look at it first, and then wondering if you see something familiar in the next slide. So here you see that one of the first sketches I made of that throwing knife. This is the original throwing knife. I abstracted certain parts of that throwing knife and then tried to bring it back into this piece of furniture in my own way. So it's positioned on its side where you can clearly see that it has that right part of the throwing knife as the backrest of the daybed, and then it narrows into the ends. So that was my way of kind of translating that alphabet that I created into my work with the materials that I just spoke about. The teak, and then the raffia pillow, and then the rock to support the daybed. And then second piece is a armoire. And that one specifically is not inspired by the currency tools or the throwing knives that you saw, but it's inspired by a shield, a traditional pre-colonial shield. As you can see in the door of the armoire, that you have this subtle reference of the shield that the warriors are holding, but then again, my own representation. Again, it's not so much that I wanted to replicate what I saw and what I read and discovered and came to know. It's more so that I wanted to give it my own interpretation and kind of preserve a part that I never knew before. And then I also started looking at pre-colonial African hair because it's just so sculptural and stunning, and we don't really see much of it in the Western world at all. And I specifically was drawn to bottom row, the middle one, that I wanted to find a way to celebrate those hairstyles into my furniture. So here is the first time that I explored that banana fiber paper and abstracted that hairstyle into the lampshade. And more specifically, this is the full image of that woman carrying her baby. And I remember when people saw it for the first time, they said like, oh, it looks so feminine, without seeing the reference image. Or it's like, it looks like it's dancing. And I'm like, I love that you're seeing it that way, because it's really a celebration of our ancestors, the female ancestors, and their strength. And it was beautiful to just hear people recognize that and see that. And then my very first piece that I designed was a room divider. And I had to design that one for Miami Design or Art Basel. And I remember that was also my first time in Miami, being with a gallery. And during that time, so many collectors and people came up to me and my gallerist, and they were like, oh, is this designed in a specific style? Is this like designed in Art Nouveau? And at that time I was like, I'm so confused, what are you talking about? I just looked at my, like both of my heritages. And I didn't think much of it, but I had that comment so often during that time. And this is 4 years ago. And then now, 4 years later, I finally realized, okay, full circle. Now it's coming back. Because obviously, as we all know, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but Art Nouveau started in Belgium. But what is interesting is that if you look at the time that Congo was colonized and when Belgian Art Nouveau started, it's very close together. So during that time, if you think about materials that were used during that time, lots of extractions, non-Western extractions, and even across the years, I've read papers of other researchers that were referencing like these beautiful curves and the way you see the staircase in the top left image. Like, yeah, all these whip-like shapes, or like even the fourth image with the leaves. A lot of people have said that these are references of the rubber plant, which is native to Congo. And I think you can even Google it, but there was a professor at Columbia that did some research and said that at one point, these curvy lines were called the whiplash lines. And I was like, well, that's quite odd to say it in that way. But Belgium is known for having a really dark history, and so much has been shoved under the rug. And at that time, I didn't realize why people would say, is this Art Nouveau? I said, no, I'm just looking at my heritage. But, you know, you put two and two together, and then it's like, well, you know, and at times it felt really strange, like, well, I am a product of one side Belgian and the other side Congolese, but then Belgium colonized Congo, and now here I am, you know. And in a way, that came kind of with this responsibility. I mean, these are big words, but I wanted to like kind of bring that to light, that so many of these modern art movements were and are still inspired by non-Western countries. And I think if we're thinking about just the future of designers, artists, architects, and anything creative, I think it's very important that they're educated in the right way and that everything is mentioned and that there's credit given where due, because so much has been extracted, but it's never mentioned. And then all these years later, we see the similarities. So that was kind of a very big moment for me personally. Which brings me to my last body of work, where I actually started diving deeper into Art Nouveau and subtly bring little shapes back, but very subtle, like the feet of these three pieces, the sides, the darker parts, are like very subtly referencing that kind of curvy, curly pattern that you see predominantly in Art Nouveau. And these three works were shown in San Francisco. But again, I never lost my original personal alphabet of like looking back at these currency tools and staying in that same line. This chaise was inspired by this throwing knife, but at the same time, which you will see in another slide, it was also inspired by something else, which we will see. It was inspired by the cowrie shell, which again is something that you can find in so many African countries, also Congo. And just something about the curviness, how it curls inside, made me want to explore that with wood. And so the top of that chair is kind of like referencing that. But also if we go back, this chair also, in a different way, is referencing the cowrie shell. So again, all my references are very abstract and subtle because for me it's not about replicating, but it's reinterpreting and preserving something. Yeah, here it is again, like just zoomed in. And then the most beautiful part of it all is that, which I saw today, is that the cowrie shell also is very commonly used on Cuba cloth, which is an exhibition that is now going on at the museum. And again, on multiple different kinds of garments. Here you see hats, different kind of hats. And again, like currency tools, they also had many different meanings and were used to show status, celebrate different events in life, and so on. And then here again, it's shown on the traditional Cuba cloths, which if some of you haven't seen the exhibition, you should, because it's really beautiful. And it really makes it also special to be here, because I had no idea, or I didn't really think about the fact that these cowrie shells are also used on Cuba cloth. And Cuba cloth is traditionally also from Congo. And then the latest body of work I'm creating, which is it's still a work in progress, is developed in a residency in Italy, which is called Grafted Legacy. And basically, it's about looking back at your legacy, whether that's cultural or environmental, however you interpret it, and then grafting your own legacy on top of it. They came up with this kind of concept and title, and then the designers that were part of the residency were free to create something or whatever they wanted. But when I was there in Turin, I had the opportunity to visit the Royal Library that was owned by the Savoy family in Turin. Obviously, now they have all passed. And I was looking through books and I stumbled upon such an old book of the colonization of the Congo. And I was like, this is almost so strange. It gave me goosebumps when I discovered this. Obviously, it was all in Italian, but basically what it said was that these artifacts, ornaments, were taken from Congo and then categorized and then shipped to Belgium, and then these photos were taken by explorers to then also present and ship to Belgium. But what I found interesting is that all these tools and these artifacts that had a function one day are now being categorized, named, and the original function is completely gone. They become something static, and ultimately, like if we look at these images, we don't know what they're used for, which obviously that's not only with African artifacts, with so many, of course, when you think about institutions in general. And in a way that made me think like so much is lost when it's categorized and extracted. How do we preserve that, what once was and what it was used for? And then I focused on one image of one of the books of my father, which is this man carrying his sleeping mat on a African stool, whether it's headrest or a stool to sit. I mean, we all know, or most of us know, that these stools had multiple functions, but not really. I've never really seen it in this context where it's used upside down to transport the mat. If we see these stools in institutions, it's usually presented as like, oh, this is a headrest, you can sit on it. But then here it becomes like a form of transportation. And so I wanted to separate those two functions and bring it back in a way, in my own interpretation, with all the work I had already done. And then I came up with, wrong button. Is this the, yeah, no. Again, this work is not realized yet. This is just a design process for me to have a better understanding. But I wanted to explore a new material, which is bronze in this case. I wanted to bring both the original function back and the other function it had. So here I created a bench / coffee table that, let me go to the next one. Here you can see it better. So that reference the kind of two functions of the original image. So obviously the top one is a reference to this stool, elongated and used as a form of transportation with a mat, but then in a contemporary way for people to use it and sit. And then when the textile is taken out of it, it becomes an entirely different piece of furniture. And this is my way of, like, in a contemporary way, of trying to bring back these functions that were completely lost when they're categorized and institutionalized, and to just honor that in my personal way. Yeah. I hope I didn't speak too fast. I have no idea what time it is, but this is a little bit about me and my design practice and my work. And it's still ongoing, and it's a work in progress, but I'm very happy that I was able to share it with all of you, and thank you so much for coming.